In 1968, an organization called AIM, or the American Indian Movement, was established to advocate for Native American rights. Agitated by generations of broken treaties and stolen land, these activists rebelled against the government that continued to neglect them. In 1972, the leaders of AIM led a march, which they termed the Trail of Broken Treaties. Once they reached the nation's capital, they occupied the Bureau of Indian Affairs for 6 days. The president of the time, Richard Nixon, seeking re-election, was careful in his reaction to these protesters. Mindful of his image, Nixon listened to their demands and in turn reformed the U.S. government to better suit their needs. By clearly listing their demands and by showing a steadfast dedication to their cause, these revolutionaries forced the government to publicly react, leading to a federal reform. This is the Trail of Broken Treaties, AIM's revolution, Nixon's reaction, and the government's reform. In the early 1800s, America faced an era of manifest destiny, the concept that Americans had the divine right to move west. This often meant tribes living in these desired areas were removed from their ancestral homelands. Later came the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This act, championed by President Andrew Jackson, forcibly relocated Native American tribes from the southeastern United States. This policy resulted in immense suffering and death, as seen in the infamous Trail of Tears. Not only did thousands die, but their descendants faced generational suffering due to the undesired territory's lack of natural resources and the loss of much of their own historically important sites and artifacts. Forced into these new territories, these tribes endured systemic poverty, inadequate housing, poor health, and decades of government neglect. Nearly a century later, the descendants of these raw people decided to do something about their unjust loss. Largely inspired by the successful civil rights movement, several leaders within the American Indian community planned out how they could address their concerns. Then, in 1968, the American Indian Movement, or AIM, was born. This organization would be a revolutionary response to the systemic issues Native Americans were facing at the time. They focused on issues like tribal sovereignty, the enforcement of treaties, and the revitalization of Native American culture. AIM soon gained national prominence through highly publicized protests, such as the occupation of Alcatraz Island, where activists held a 19-month occupation of Alcatraz Island. There, they claimed the unused federal lands could be purchased under the terms of previous American signed treaties. Galvanized by the attention this gained, AIM was eager for a revolution. Listen to the testimony of Phyllis Pond Overton. Notice how she addresses the injustices she experienced within the federal government.
People talked about having Indians be in control of their destiny, and I would notice all these things that were going through the Bureau that I just really didn't agree with. And again, when I went there, I was really naive, and I thought by going to work for the Bureau that I was going to be of some service to Indian people, and I couldn't have been more wrong. We never got promotions, and people would apply for them, and when it came time for us to file the suit, people in Denver couldn't believe, the Bureau of Indian Affairs discriminating against Indians.
In the autumn of 1972, the leaders of AIM attempted a more direct approach to their demands. They organized a caravan of protesters that would collect eastward across America, gaining members as they traveled. This journey began in St. Paul, Minnesota, with a destination of Washington, D.C., and lasted 1,100 to 1,150 miles. The caravan gathered momentum and were joined by tribes along its route that carried with it a wave of demands called the 20-point position paper. This included a commission to review broken treaties, land reform, and federal protection of Indians' religious and cultural integrity. Upon reaching the capital, the activists were met with a wall of indifference, and their promised meetings were canceled. Once again, the federal government failed to keep their promise, which further upset these activists. This disrespect ignited a fiery 6-day standoff between protesters and the city's police. In an act of rebellion, protesters occupied the Bureau of Indian Affairs building, blockaded the police, and established a temporary base of operations. While inside, they discovered damning evidence of federal mismanagement and corruption.
The building we took, we padlocked it up. Put chains on it, padlocked it. They couldn't get in. So they gave us so many days to get out of there. We didn't. So they had to cut their way in. And then they had to take us out on stretchers because we wouldn't walk down. All went up to the third floor. They had to carry us all the way down. put us in the squad cars and take us to jail.
The Trailer Broken Treaties culminated with the occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. As Gerald Guild suggested, these Native American activists found great pride in occupying the government, the same government that occupied their lands.
And I mean, that is the people getting together and showing the larger United States, reminding the United States of its obligations, to Native Americans. So I think it, in and of itself, was a revolution. It was pushing back against the United States, and any revolution is going against the ruling power. And basically, the Trailer Broken Treaties was saying, "Hey, United States, you have not held up your end of the bargain. You have not held fast to the treaties we signed with you." So I think it, in and of itself, was a revolution.
In response to this revolution, President Richard Nixon carefully navigated the resistance. Seeking re-election, Nixon made sure not to repeat the mistakes of previous leaders. For example, during the Civil Rights Movement, America was criticized for protesters depicted being blasted with fire hoses and attacked by police dogs. Nixon wished to avoid negative press and, in an attempt to avoid public embarrassment, had federal representatives speak with AIM's leaders. Nixon was informed of their 20-point position paper and promised to evaluate each point with his cabinet. Then, after 6 days of occupation, the Nixon administration negotiated a peaceful exit despite the damages. The protesters were offered travel funds and given immunity from prosecution for defacing federal property. And the most important impact of this movement resulted in officials agreeing to form a federal task force to further review the demands. Even though they agreed to review the 20 points, the federal task force ultimately rejected the demands. While the immediate outcome was frustrating, the occupation sent a powerful message. As one leader famously put it, they had sent one hell of a smoke signal. It united indigenous nations like never before, laying the groundwork for a new era of Native American activism and inspiring later events like the occupation of Wounded Knee. The Trailer Broken Treaties was a loud, defiant step towards holding the government accountable for its past failures and demanding a just future. Eventually, Nixon, still seeking re-election, met with representatives from these tribes. Together, they agreed on some level of reform. Documents such as the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act of 1975 allowed tribes to take over the administration of federally funded programs so that they could play a more active role in their own education. They also established the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act of 1976, which addressed the chronic underfunding of Native American healthcare. Their impact can even be seen in modern times as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples passed in 2007. Based upon the 20-point position paper, this organization set up a global approach for how countries should treat their native populations. The natives were seeking sovereignty and wanted the Treaty of Fort Loraine honored, but couldn't achieve this due to the lack of resources. Now, hear Ms. Venus Prince's opinion on this topic.
Given tribes are essentially sovereign nations, but when you've had another, sovereign come in and not honor their obligations and diminish your land base, and to me that is a fundamental erosion of the tribe's sovereignty by diminishing that land base, which I think a lot of the broken treaties did.
While the original American Indian movement fractured decades ago, successful organizations continue to fight for indigenous rights today. Led by groups like the AIM Grand Governing Council, modern activists advocate for a wide range of issues, including treaty rights, tribal sovereignty, and cultural preservation. They also support indigenous peoples worldwide and provide community services. Ultimately, AIM's revolution against the federal government's broken promises forced President Nixon to react, and in turn, reform in the form of several policies designed to tackle these detrimental issues. While our historical relationship with these tribes are scarred by broken treaties, perhaps today we can inspire positive change and dissolve decades of systematic oppression over time. If you wish to help our American Indian communities today, please join organizations such as National Congress of American Indians and Native American Connections.